Appetizing, fresh, tasty, convenient. Today's array of refrigerated food products available in supermarkets, delis, and restaurants contains some of the most delicious and nutritious food available anywhere. Today's busy lifestyle demand it, and customers young and old love it and enjoy these palatable, time-saving food products. It's an everyday part of the modern world we live in. But there is another side to the story, as old as humankind and just as much the enemy as ever. Foodborne illnesses continue to take their toll in this modern world. The Centers for Disease Control estimates that 76 million people a year become ill from The exact answer is different with each outbreak. The common factor is that someone failed to protect the food involved from contamination. In the majority of cases, it was the people who bought and served the food in their homes or at some organization they belonged to, such as a church or social club. In some cases, the food became contaminated at the location at which it was sold to the consumer. But if we look at those headlines again, we notice that in all the ones we showed you, the food was contaminated when it left the facility where it was prepared and packaged. Those are the incidents we're concerned with. And our primary job isn't investigation, it's prevention. We're part of FSI, Food Safety Initiative, not CSI. And the best thing yet, if we do our jobs in prevention, there never has to be an investigation of how a foodborne illness outbreak happened. In a way, our jobs are like those high-tech detectives on TV, though. We're using science, common sense, and analytic thinking to look for culprits in hiding that could cause harm to the public and to our employers. A large part of our food safety responsibility has to do with monitoring and controlling harmful bacteria that can easily thrive in the kinds of foods we deal with. But there are additional concerns, such as preventing foreign objects from getting into the product and making sure that foods aren't contaminated with ingredients that could result in a severe allergic reaction but are not listed on the label. We'll primarily be concerned with three types of hazards: microbiological, chemical, and physical. Microbiological hazards are living organisms so small that they can only be seen under a microscope or when large numbers of them grow as a culture in a laboratory dish. Many microorganisms can cause humans and animals to become ill, either through direct infection or by a reaction to a toxin, a poison. Microorganisms of this type are known as pathogens. Microorganisms are everywhere in the environment. The three basic ways of controlling them are washing them away with soap and water, killing them with chemical sanitizers or heat, and then using cold to inhibit their growth. For many ready-to-eat foods, cold is the only alternative. Chemical contamination, if it happens, can come from chemicals used for other purposes in the plant that have no business being around a production area when it's active. Detergents, sanitizers, pesticides, and lubricants must be clearly labeled, kept only in specific areas, and always kept away from food products. Physical contamination means any foreign object in the food. The category includes personal articles that employees could accidentally drop into the product: dirt, hair, machinery parts, slivers of wood, shards of broken glass, pieces of wire, or metal parts from the machinery. We are primarily concerned with physical contaminants: glass, wood, and metal. Metal can be detected by a variety of electromagnetic devices, and the others by X-ray. In other chapters in this series, We'll learn more about the hazards, how we control them, how we make sure our controls are working, and what we must do when an incident does occur. Each chapter, including this one, comes with a short series of questions for you to answer so you can be sure you remembered all of the important content. And it is important. We all can take great pride in being part of an essential industry, and none of us wants to be involved in an incident in which people become ill or hospitalized or even die. Also, a recall of contaminated product can be extremely costly for a company. One incident in Canada in 2007 cost the producer $20 million. In another recent incident, a U.S. company had to recall 143 million pounds of beef. It put the company out of business, and at least one person went to jail, although there were no reports of anyone becoming ill from the product. Those of us who prepare ready-to-eat foods have to be especially careful, because there's no cooking after it's purchased to kill any remaining bacteria. We can't assume that any food is contamination-proof, though over the years there have been a lot of cases of contaminated meat, poultry, fish, shellfish, potato salad, dips, sandwiches, and the like. There have been surprises in recent years, including peppers, spinach, various salad greens, peanuts and peanut products, pistachio nuts and walnuts. The peanut products recall may have been the largest in U.S. history. So as you view the chapters in this video series, watch and listen carefully. It'll make you a better educated professional and a well-informed citizen of the refrigerated foods industry. Food Safety Initiative chapter is an introduction to how we control hazards and provide the safest possible environment in which to produce the safest possible product. To control food safety hazards, we must identify what the hazards are and where we can detect and control them. Hazard analysis and critical control points. In Chapter 1, we categorized the three types of hazards we'll primarily be concerned with: microbiological, chemical, and physical. We can control microorganisms, pathogens that make people sick, through sanitation, cleanliness, and disinfection, and by using heat or cold. With many refrigerated foods, cold is the only option. To prevent chemical contamination, we must make sure that these dangerous chemicals are clearly labeled and kept only in specific areas away from food products. Physical objects that must not get into the food include not only wood, metal, or glass, but also personal contamination, like jewelry, hair, or broken fingernails. Policies about personal attire, hair containment, and prohibitions on carrying personal items into the production areas are very important. Light bulbs must be protected by plastic shields in case they might shatter, and areas where there are glass jars or wooden pallets must be inspected. Now, what we have just done is identify some hazards. To develop a HACCP plan, we have to define critical control points. At these CCPs, the plant needs to have rules, data collection procedure, and a record-keeping system to verify that these things are done. In the chapter on HACCP, we'll talk about the kinds of products that are required by law to have HACCP plans. But a HACCP plan is a good idea for all products, whether required or not. HACCP is built on foundations called prerequisite programs: GMPs, good manufacturing practices, and SSOPs, sanitation standard operating procedures. GMPs are methods endorsed by the Food and Drug Administration. SSOPs are situation-specific sanitation procedures that apply to sanitation conditions in the food-producing facility. 8 sanitation conditions must be monitored. safety of the water, food contact surfaces, prevention of cross-contamination, personal hygiene of employees, protection of food from adulteration with toxic compounds, proper labeling, storage, and use of toxic compounds, employee health conditions, and pest control. A written SSOP should exist for each of the 8 processes, including how the sanitation conditions will be met and monitored. The details are up to the individual producer, but must be sufficient to guarantee that each control point is effective. Each processor is required to maintain sanitation control records that, at a minimum, document that these 8 conditions are monitored and that, when necessary, corrective actions are taken. Management and the committees they appoint supply the plan. It's up to us as employees to implement the plan carefully and do it right. Safety of the water supply is normal in modern food production plants, but we must be vigilant and never allow anyone to use water from an unsanitary source where clean, safe water should be used. Food contact surfaces must be kept clean. We must observe the cleaning regimen exactly, including complete disassembly of equipment to get to hard-to-reach areas where bacteria can thrive, using the proper cleaning and disinfecting chemicals, and rinsing all surfaces with clean water. When processing food, if there's even a chance that a surface has been contaminated, notify your supervisor. Cross-contamination occurs when microorganisms from one area of the plant are carried into a food processing area. It can also occur if an ingredient container is reused without proper cleaning and sanitation. Bacteria could be multiplying in the film of residue. Some people have very serious food allergies and could even die from them. So follow company policies and never allow even trace amounts of known allergens in food that does not say so on the label. We'll cover allergens in another chapter. If you are to wear special clothing, such as lab coats, jumpsuits, coveralls, plastic or rubber gloves, and the like, on the food production line, observe policies carefully, and if you believe an item has become contaminated, put on a fresh one. Observe policies on shoe coverings and disinfectant foot baths. That's another way we control contamination. Personal hygiene is so important that we'll devote an entire chapter to the subject. In brief, wash your hands thoroughly, observe personal sanitation policies, and don't carry personal items that are likely to fall into the product, like jewelry and watches, into the food production area. We must be very careful not to contaminate the food with toxic compounds. In a recent incident in the Midwest, a number of children were sickened, fortunately none of them seriously, when snow cones were made with a chemical degreaser rather than syrup. The syrup and the degreaser were similar in color and came in the same size bottle. And if the facility had rules regarding the labeling of toxic chemicals and properly required that they be stored in a special separate area, someone did not follow the rules. Personal health is another area of high responsibility. If you have an infectious disease, or a cough, a fever, a boil, staph infection, or open sore, or diarrhea, you should not work around food. Notify your supervisor. Pest control is usually handled by an outside company or some special person within the organization. But we can help in this area by reporting any instance of seeing insects, mice, rats, or other pests in or around the outside of the plant. Also, keep areas clean so as not to attract pests. Don't allow litter to accumulate to make hiding places. Never leave open containers of food in lockers to attract pests. Those are things that you can do to help guard against contamination and foodborne illness, regardless of what your job is. If we all carefully do our jobs right and help each other to control against contamination, we can make sure that our facility will not be the source of costly and perhaps deadly contamination. In this Food Safety Initiative lesson, we'll cover hazard analysis and critical control points, or HACCP. To control food safety hazards, we have to identify what the hazards are and where we can detect and control them. Hazard analysis and critical control points. In chapters 1 and 2, we discussed the three principal types of hazards we're concerned with: microbiological, chemical, and physical. We also briefly covered another type of hazard, contamination by allergens, which is the subject of a chapter of its own. And we also covered the foundations of HACCP, GMPs and SSOPs. But HACCP is more than these. It is a complete, documented, verifiable, and verified plan for food safety designed specifically for the facility in which it is implemented by a committee of people who work there. Here's the basic idea. A HACCP plan identifies what the contamination hazards are, where they might get into the food, how we can take steps to prevent and control them. Critical control points. At these CCPs, the plan includes rules, data collection procedures, and a record-keeping system to verify that these things are done. In the U.S., formal HACCP plans are required for juice, meat, poultry, or seafood products. It is likely that they'll become mandatory for other types of foods. Foreign companies that produce foods that require HACCP plans in the United States must have HACCP plans, and the importer must register them with the U.S. government. Also, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's Food Safety Enhancement Program encourages all food production facilities to have HACCP plans and has a system through which a company can have its HACCP program formally recognized and qualified for FSIS audits for quality control. Indeed, a HACCP plan is a good idea for any food production facility. Through the Global Food Safety Initiative, HACCP is becoming recognized worldwide as the most efficient way to avoid recalls and contamination incidents. And it is affordable, even for small facilities with a dozen or fewer employees. If a facility turns out multiple products, it is appropriate to have separate HACCP plans for different categories of product with different manufacturing steps and different control procedures. Before you can begin developing your HACCP plan, you and your company must have completed the required 5 preliminary tasks. A HACCP team must be assembled with individuals having the appropriate product-specific knowledge and expertise necessary for the development of an effective HACCP plan. Where such expertise is not available on site, expert advice should be obtained from other sources. Team members and their responsibilities must be clearly identified as part of the HACCP plan. The entire team is to be involved in the development and final approval of the plan. Documented team meetings should occur on a regular basis to assess HACCP records and issues. The team must assess all deviations, documentation errors, corrective actions, and assure that corrective actions are monitored for effectiveness. Step 2 requires that a full description of the product must be developed, including relevant safety information such as composition, physical and chemical attributes, processing, packaging, durability and storage conditions, and methods and conditions of distribution. Products with similar characteristics or processing steps may be grouped together for the purpose of development of the HACCP plan. The intended use of the product must be determined in Step 3 and should be based on the expected uses of the product by the end user or consumer. In Step 4, the HACCP team must construct a clear and easy-to-understand flow diagram for each HACCP plan. The diagram must outline each step involved in the process that is directly under the control of the establishment. The diagram must indicate the ingredient and material categories used, all preparation steps, all equipment used, blending steps, processing steps, rework and returned products, packaging equipment, and the steps preceding and following the process. Later, once CCPs, critical control points, are determined, They must be clearly identified on the flow diagram and numbered to correspond with the hazard analysis and CCP records and documentation. Step 5 is on-site confirmation of the flow diagram. The HACCP team must perform an on-site review of the operation to verify the accuracy and completeness of the flow diagram during all stages and hours of operation. Modifications should be made to the flow diagram as necessary and documented. The flow diagram should be signed by knowledgeable operations management and dated to verify its completeness and accuracy. The chart must remain current. With those 5 things done, you can begin creating the actual HACCP plan. There are 7 principles involved in creating a HACCP plan. 1. Conduct a hazard analysis to identify the hazards. 2. Identify critical control points for controlling the hazards. 3. Establish critical limits, measurable methods of assessment for each control point, for example, a temperature range. 4. Establish the monitoring procedures for each CCP. 5. Establish actions to be taken when deviations from the critical limits occur. 6. Establish verification procedures. 7. Establish a record-keeping system. The HACCP plan must be kept up to date. It must be revised to show any changes in building layout, equipment, raw material, product formulation or preparation, processing, packaging, distribution, intended use, product flow, or employee flow. Creating the HACCP plan is up to management and the members of the HACCP team, but following the plan is everyone's responsibility. Your job may involve the monitoring of a critical control point. If so, that is your primary responsibility in contamination control. Collect the data in a timely, accurate manner. Make sure it is entered correctly in the record. Report any deviations immediately. Monitoring will very likely include recording the temperature and making sure that the product is within a particular temperature range at that step in the process. Be very careful to do so accurately. If the temperature is outside the range specified, or if there's anything else that you are responsible for monitoring that is amiss, make sure that it's noted in the record and report the problem to your supervisor immediately. If we all carefully do our jobs right and help each other to control against contamination, we can make sure that our facility will not be the source of costly and perhaps deadly contamination. Food Safety Initiative lesson, we'll cover the personal aspects of ensuring food safety. When you watch the laboratory detective shows on television, you notice that the investigators are very careful to follow the rules about things like clothing, sterile sample containers, and rubber or plastic gloves so they don't contaminate the evidence. In the refrigerated food industry, we have to follow very strict rules too, to avoid contaminating the product. And like the TV detectives, if we make a small mistake, a serial killer could run free in our community. Except our serial killers are bacteria with fancy scientific names like Salmonella and Listeria. We'll learn more about these dangerous microorganisms in our next video lesson. The first rule in avoiding personally contaminating the food product is, if you are sick, you must not work in the production or packaging of refrigerated foods. If you have a fever, a cough, sneezing, congestion, or a runny nose, if you have an open sore or boil, or have gastrointestinal symptoms like vomiting or diarrhea, or if your doctor has diagnosed you as having an infectious disease, notify your supervisor. There's a good reason for not working if you're sick. Many consumers of our products are not as strong and hardy as we are. Fatalities from foodborne illnesses are most often elderly people, pregnant women, infants, or small children, or people whose immune systems have been weakened by disease or medication. An infection that just makes you feel bad might be fatal to such a person. Even if we're completely healthy, the number one method of transmission of infectious microorganisms is our hands. We touch contaminated objects and then transfer the contamination to other things we touch, or to ourselves, for example, when our hands contact our mouths. That's why proper and frequent hand washing is so important to your own health and to food safety. You must wash your hands thoroughly before you enter the food preparation area, and if you leave the area, you must wash your hands again before returning, especially if you've been to the restroom or if your hands have touched the surface of anything that might be contaminated. There are three critical factors in proper hand washing: hot water, soap, and friction or scrubbing. The water should be as hot as you can stand it. You don't want to scald your hands, but remember that the water's effectiveness in dissolving dirt films that hold bacteria increases with water temperature. Test the water temperature and start with your hands wet. Then apply the soap. It is necessary to use soap because water alone will not completely remove any film of oil from your skin or other oily or greasy residue that can harbor microorganisms. The rubbing-scrubbing action is very important in dislodging contaminants from your hands. You need to rub your hands together with the soapy solution on them for at least 20 seconds. Pay attention to the areas around and under your fingernails and between fingers. Then continue the rubbing action as you rinse your hands thoroughly until you feel that the soap is gone. Dry your hands with a fresh paper towel or air dryer as provided by your facility. If your facility uses hand sanitizer, apply it as a final step after your hands have been washed and dried. Hand sanitizer alone is not as effective as washing with soap and water because washing does a better job of removing films of dirt where bacteria can grow again. But if you're in a situation where soap and water are not available, but hand sanitizer is, the sanitizer alone is a lot better than no action at all. If your job puts you in direct contact with the food, you may also be required to wear sanitary rubber or plastic gloves as an added precaution. They're not effective if contaminated. If your glove touches some surface that might have contamination, throw the gloves away and replace them with a fresh sanitary pair. Even if you wash your hair every day, it still harbors microorganisms that could contaminate the food, and customers are very disgusted when they find hair in their food. Head and facial hair containment are mandatory. Always wear the appropriate hair and beard nets, caps, or other protective measures required by your facility. The same applies to special clothing that is specified for your job: lab coats, jumpsuits, coveralls, or whatever. If policy requires them, never enter a food preparation area without wearing them. If you leave the production area, don't wear the special clothing in other areas of the plant. Observe laundry policies. Don't wear soiled clothing or gloves. Don't put the special clothing in a locker or in your car and then wear it again. Bacteria can be growing in the food spots on the garment. This special clothing is effective only when it is fresh and sanitary. Once soiled, it should be placed in the proper receptacle for laundry. Do not store soiled protective clothing in your locker. If it has food spots on it, it can create an insect control problem. The same goes for storing open containers of food products in your locker. Don't do it. And remember, if you are required to wear plastic or rubber gloves, replace them with clean ones if you touch anything that could contaminate them. Leave all personal items in your locker. Avoid watches and exposed jewelry, pens, or other items in pockets that could then fall into the product and contaminate it or remain in it as a physical contaminant. Don't wear artificial fingernails when working directly with food. One could come off and get into the product. Likewise, don't wear fingernail polish. because it can flake or chip off, contaminating the food. Observe facility rules for contamination of clean areas from your shoes. This may mean putting on clean disposable shoe coverings before entering some production areas. Most facilities require special cleanable footwear. Some require that you use foot baths containing sanitizing solution before entering a controlled area. Don't forget or try to avoid these procedures. Shoes are a particularly troublesome source of bacterial contamination. We've talked a lot about bacteria and contaminating microorganisms. In another FSI lesson, we'll talk about some of the most common and troublesome microorganisms that can contaminate refrigerated foods, how they can get into the food we prepare, and what we can do to control and detect them. Organisms are the principal public enemies in our food safety initiative. They are small living things that normally can't be seen without the help of a microscope, or if you grow a culture of thousands of them in a laboratory dish. As in criminal forensics, there are repeat offenders, familiar names and faces, so to speak, enough that we can come up with a most wanted, or more accurately, most unwanted list. The names on that list are there because they cause foodborne illnesses. The onset of foodborne illness is between 2 hours and 5 days after exposure. The symptoms that develop are nausea, general gastric distress, diarrhea, vomiting, and dizziness. If unchecked, the symptoms can lead to dehydration, organ failure, and death. The person with the greatest risk of becoming seriously ill or dying from the effects of these microorganisms are small children, the elderly, persons with compromised immunity systems, and pregnant women, in which case they can also cause miscarriage. Some of the microorganisms on our most unwanted list are common in the soil, air, and almost everywhere, so we can easily introduce them into the production environment. Others are common in groundwater, the hides and hoofs of livestock, and the like, and they can ride in on ingredients. Let's look at some of the names on the list and learn more about them. Campylobacter is the single largest cause of diarrheal disease. Though 90% of cases are from poultry, it may be present in milk and untreated water. The greatest risk to the refrigerated foods manufacturer is contaminated ingredients or cross-contamination from raw poultry. It can cause paralysis. Listeria monocytogenes is a persistent problem for the refrigerated foods industry because it can grow at low temperatures. Some of the most serious illnesses caused by Listeria monocytogenes are meningitis, stillbirths, and miscarriages. It also has one of the highest fatality rates among foodborne illnesses. Since there is no tolerance for this organism, its presence is a frequent cause of recalls. Listeria monocytogenes is a difficult pathogen to control. It can tolerate heat, salt, and low pH, and can grow at refrigerated temperatures and survive freezing. Salmonella, which was the subject of many of the headlines in the introduction chapter, is so common that one study found it in 24% of supermarket chicken. Fortunately, normal cooking and pasteurization temperatures will kill this microorganism. Salmonella can survive in dry environments for long periods of time. If no kill step is used, its absence must be assured on all ingredients. Clostridium perfringens is also killed by heat, but cooking times as well as cooling rates must be controlled. Staphylococcus aureus is the cause of staph infections. The most common symptoms are sores or boils on the skin. The bacterium is commonly from a sore or because it was on the hands of someone who had contact with someone that was infected. Some strains can produce other symptoms, such as stomach and intestinal disturbances, or potentially fatal toxic shock syndrome. Staph infections are very resistant to most commonly used antibiotics. E. coli 0157H7 is normally found in the intestines of animals, especially cattle. It is well known not only for food-related illness, but for contamination of children's wading pools. It produces the Shiga toxin that can damage the heart, lungs, nervous system, or kidneys. 5% of those infected suffer kidney damage or even kidney failure. 1% of all cases die. Some recent examples of E. coli 0157H7 contamination have involved a variety of meat, fresh vegetables, and ready-to-bake cookie dough. In the cookie dough example, the problem was that some people insist on eating raw, uncooked cookie dough. In this case, not a good idea. You may also hear the names of other pathogens, including Shigella, Vibrio, and Yersinia, which is an example of the kind of disease a food terrorist might try to spread as a threat to our national security. Being able to name these potential killers is a sign of a professional, but the important thing is knowing how to control them. Controlling them depends on knowing what conditions these microorganisms need to survive and thrive in the food processing facility. Microorganisms, like all living things, need mainly 4 elements: food, water, time, and the right temperature in order to grow and survive. That's why it's so important to keep surfaces clean, maintain the right temperatures, and minimize the time products are exposed to temperature abuse. Microorganisms grow and multiply over time if they have food and water. That means they can thrive in crevices and spaces in the equipment, unless we make sure those crevices and spaces are thoroughly cleaned on schedule. Microorganisms thrive unless conditions are too cold or too hot. That means that we need to control the temperatures used in any cooking, pasteurization, or chilling process. And it means that it's very important to keep the environment in the plant cold, clean, and under control. How specifically do we control microorganisms? 1. We have well-designed cleanliness and sanitation procedures and schedules. 2. At certain points in the process, we may introduce chemical sanitizers to sanitize the equipment, and in some cases the food itself. 3. We carefully control the temperature at all stages of production. 4. We control certain things that can discourage microorganism growth, qualities like water activity, salt levels, preservatives, and pH. pH is a measure of how acid or alkaline something is. A rating of 7 would be neutral, pure distilled water. A strong acid like battery acid would have a rating down near 0. Lemon juice is about 2. Low pH ratings discourage microorganism growth. Some preservatives work by altering the pH. Others work in other ways because of their chemical composition. Common table salt is an example, but several others are commonly used. Nitrites protect color in meats and ward off botulism. Sulfur dioxide and sulfites retard bacterial growth and protect the color of dried fruits and fruit juices. Sodium benzoate and benzoic acid are sometimes used to preserve fish sauce, salads, and baked goods. Sorbic acid and sorbates are mold inhibitors. Temperature and pH are factors that may be monitored throughout the process to make sure everything is going as it should be. When your job requires you to monitor and record data, you must do so on time and with great accuracy. Sometimes temperature ranges are very important. For example, when it's necessary to heat the product to at least 160 degrees Fahrenheit for purposes of food safety. In other cases, the process might require higher temperatures. In addition to monitoring and controlling the temperature, the amount of time it must be at or above the target can also be critical. It depends on the product and the microorganism we must control. A part of the monitoring process often involves collecting product samples periodically at critical times in the manufacturing process and testing them for contamination in the laboratory. An in-house lab or an accredited third-party off-site lab or some combination of the two may be used. Whatever the case, labs should conform to ISO IEC 17025-2005 and should be qualified to use the specific testing methods employed. An example of such testing would be routine verification of the microbial quality of incoming raw material. It's also common for facilities to have an environmental monitoring program that includes food contact surfaces and nearby non-contact surfaces, including aprons and gloves. Sample collection and laboratory procedures must always be carefully controlled, consistent, and always follow aseptic techniques. Aseptic techniques are sampling techniques used to minimize the risk of increasing the microbial load of a sample. Samples must be collected in laboratory-clean containers and must not be contaminated from any source that could affect the results, such as dirty utensils, dirty plastic gloves, or having some foreign material fall into the sample. Temperature controls must remain in place as the sample is taken to the lab, as well as in the lab itself, and all testing must be done strictly according to protocols. Record keeping must be thorough, accurate, and easy to locate, and should make it clear who did the work, when, and what results were obtained. If test results show the presence of a pathogen, that batch of product should be placed on hold and not shipped. The same would apply to subsequent batches until they test negative. Remember that a positive followed by a negative result on the same batch is still violative and must not be shipped. Exact attention to detail is also crucial when the laboratory routinely checks or recalibrates measuring devices, such as weight scales, thermometers, and other metering devices. Your job may or may not involve gathering samples or doing lab work, but all of us have some responsibility for a very important aspect of microorganism control: keeping the plant and all equipment and food contact surfaces clean and sanitized. We'll tell you more about that in another FSI chapter. The threat posed by microorganisms makes proper plant sanitation and cleanliness of equipment extremely important to our food safety initiative. Actually, it begins with the equipment itself. Our prerequisites should state that all equipment used be designed for food manufacturing, demand its ability to be disassembled and properly cleaned and sanitized, and be made of durable, cleanable materials such as stainless steel or other material allowed for food manufacturing or direct food contact. All lubricants used on the equipment must be food grade, approved for incidental food contact. A master sanitation schedule should be in place, including a schedule and written procedures for cleaning and maintaining each specific piece of equipment used in manufacturing the food, as well as walls, ceilings, lights, overheads, and other areas not cleaned daily. Even though they may not need daily attention, their regular cleaning is important. The schedules and procedures must be followed precisely. The plant should also have a predetermined schedule for preventive maintenance. Only approved maintenance procedures may be used. For example, it is not acceptable to make temporary repairs by binding parts with wire or duct tape. These kinds of repairs could harbor bacteria, mold, or insects. Equipment should be carefully inspected at each scheduled cleaning or maintenance. Watch out for loose parts that could fall into the food and for food contact surfaces that are corroded, pitted, cracked, or deeply scratched. These flaws could harbor bacteria. Some simple equipment may require no disassembly, but most equipment should be taken completely apart for thorough cleaning and sanitizing. Begin equipment cleaning by giving all components a preliminary rinse with potable water. Water potability must be confirmed at least annually. It is important that all residues be removed from the food contact surfaces for control of microorganisms as well as preventing allergenic cross-contamination. We'll cover food allergen control in more detail in another chapter. Spraying air or water must be carefully controlled. The resulting mist could spread contaminants to nearby surfaces and equipment. While high-pressure water and/or air may be acceptable during cleanup, it should never be used during production or when there is food or ingredients in the area. After the preliminary rinse, the equipment is washed with the specified appropriate commercial-grade detergent. Consult your sanitation supplier for product recommendations, specific use instructions, and recommended dispensing equipment. Always refer to the Material Safety Data Sheet, MSDS, before using cleaning products. Specified surfaces may require special cleaning attention, such as scrubbing with a brush or abrasive scrubbing pad, or the use of special detergents and foam applications. Detergents and soaps must be rinsed away with potable water. After all soap, detergent, or cleaning compound is rinsed away, the correct EPA-registered no-rinse food contact surface sanitizer is applied. Read and follow the label directions for proper use. The surfaces must be clean and free of residue for the sanitizer to do its job. Using the correct cleaning compounds and sanitizers appropriately and safely is important. The wrong chemical used in the wrong application could damage surfaces or cause a safety issue. Always follow instructions and contact your chemical supplier if you have questions. Use only the approved chemical from a properly labeled container and return the container to the designated storage area. Never mix any chemicals unless your chemical supplier indicates that it is safe to mix them. Any tools, such as brushes, spatulas, scrapers, anything used in the cleaning process, must also be cleaned and sanitized before storage so they do not become sources of contamination. Because they are difficult to clean and sanitize, sponges and all similar absorbent materials are not acceptable cleaning tools for the food production environment. Single-use nylon scrub pads are recommended. Those are the generalized procedures for cleaning most equipment. Specific instructions should be part of your written cleaning procedures. There also may be some areas of your facility where the procedures we just watched are not appropriate, at least not on a daily basis. For example, water is typically not allowed in dry areas such as a spice blending room. In other situations, other cleaning methods are used, such as brushes, scrapers, and vacuum cleaners. Another important part of sanitation is keeping the plant free from clutter that could provide hiding places for bacterial growth or pests. And a neat area with easy passage is a lot easier to clean. Cleanliness policies also include the receiving area and trailers used to transport food to and from the facility. Your plant will have cleaning procedures and specific SSOPs for the cleaning and inspection of each area and piece of equipment. If sanitation is part of your job, you must know and follow your facility's cleaning procedures and SSOPs. There will also be specific procedures for record keeping. Each time a piece of equipment is cleaned and sanitized, it must be documented, and that record must be kept in its designated place so that it is easily available to coworkers and regulatory agencies. Visual inspection is the minimum method of verifying the effectiveness of the sanitation procedures. At the conclusion of cleaning, equipment should be carefully inspected for any signs of remaining food residue. If food particles remain, the equipment must be re-cleaned before it is sanitized. Once the sanitizing of the equipment is complete, no other activities should take place in the area that could potentially recontaminate the equipment. Equipment should be given a visual inspection after sanitizing and again before use. If a food contact surface was certified as clean and it was not, or has become contaminated in the interim, there is an important problem to be addressed. Observations should be carefully and accurately entered in the records. In addition to food contact surfaces and the general areas around them, we need to pre-inspect receiving areas, trailers used for incoming or outgoing product, and containers or utensils to ensure that they are cleanable, of good sanitary design, and acceptable to be used in food manufacturing. Visual inspections for cleanliness and remaining food debris may be supplemented by ATP bioluminescence testing, which is a sensitive test that detects the presence of food soil and microorganisms. If a surface tests positive, corrective action must be taken. For example, another immediate cleaning and sanitization of the area, and then retesting. Record keeping is very important because the records will then offer clues as to what or who caused the problem. ATP bioluminescence testing is the bridge between visual inspection and microbiological surveillance. Bioluminescence can confirm whether there is contamination, but not specifically if it is microbiological. It is a measurement of the amount of contaminating material present. Full environmental surveillance should include microbiological testing, such as swab samples from surfaces and other environmental areas. This would include testing for microbial contamination as well as the presence of pathogens such as Listeria. Surfaces that may be tested routinely are classified as either food contact surfaces or non-food contact surfaces, environmental surfaces. A food contact surface is any surface, utensil, machine part, or container that comes in direct contact with the food product. A non-food contact surface or environmental surface is a surface in the area that does not normally come in contact with the food. Examples include walls, floors, the on-off switch on a food conveyor, or nearby pipes or ductwork. Aprons and gloves may be considered food contact surfaces if they actually do come in contact with the food product. If your job includes collecting environmental surveillance samples, follow your facility's SSOPs precisely. In some cases, samples may be taken with swabs or sponges. Take care to use good sampling technique and not to contaminate the sample by letting the swab or sponge touch any surface other than the one you are sampling. Whatever collection method is used, carefully note when and from what surface it was taken, and immediately send it to the lab for processing. Careful sanitation procedures and related record keeping, combined with good personal hygiene habits and a well-organized, well-maintained facility, are critical elements of our food safety initiative. Thus far in our food safety initiative, we have learned that all of us in the refrigerated foods industry are FSIs, Food Safety Investigators, frontline defenders of our nation's food supply. We've learned about the most unwanted threats to consumers, microorganisms that can sicken, kill, and cost our companies millions of dollars. We also learned about other threats, dangerous chemicals and foreign objects that can accidentally get into food products and injure our customers and our reputations. We have learned that dirt, dust, and other environmental debris and uncontrolled moisture can provide an environment in which our microbiological enemies can thrive, and that contamination innocently spread from areas that are not sanitary is a threat to food safety. Through it all, we've emphasized how our own alertness, combined with common sense, scientific knowledge, and accurate record keeping, can prevent these threats from harming our customers or causing our companies costly recalls. In this chapter, we'll apply all those things to the food production environment in the facility we work in to see how to maximize sanitation and food safety and minimize the probability of contamination. It starts with a well-designed and maintained facility. Exteriors should have adequate drainage to discourage moisture entering the building, and there should be no vegetation immediately adjacent to the building to harbor pests that could then get inside. Prevention of pest entry is very important. Cracks or holes around doors and windows, in walls and along the foundation should be detected promptly and repaired. Proper closed containers should be provided for trash and garbage. These should be some distance away from the building to discourage insects and other pests from getting inside production areas. Intake air should be filtered to avoid drawing dust and other contaminants into the plant. Air intakes should also be located away from sources of dust, noxious odors, or exhaust air from the plant. Positive clean air pressure should be maintained in product areas to prevent contamination from exterior sources or from raw material handling areas. And of course, fresh potable water and proper sanitary sewers are an absolute must, as are procedures and facilities for safe waste containment and removal. There must be no contamination of potable water by non-potable water. Water testing records should be maintained. Also, only approved boiler compounds may be used in generating steam that is used to sanitize or cook foods. The wrong kind of water in the wrong place can be a serious problem. Remember the conditions necessary for bacteria to grow: a moist environment in a hospitable temperature range with some food source. Be alert for leaks from the roof or from pipes and report them immediately. Even if it is potable water that is leaking, it can run underneath equipment and into crevices and provide an environment where bacteria can grow. The same is true for condensation that occurs when humid air contacts a cooler surface. The condensation can build up and create a bacterial breeding ground on the surface of the duct or pipe. This is particularly hazardous if the pipes or duct run overhead in a food preparation area. Anytime you see water droplets condensing on or dripping from a surface in such an area, follow your company's procedures for correcting this condition immediately. The plant interior should utilize easily cleanable and sanitizable surfaces and materials, and avoid easily contaminated surfaces such as carpeting, rugs, or drapes in or adjacent to food handling areas. A linear traffic flow should be established so raw materials are received at one end of the plant and finished product is shipped from the opposite end. The linear plan also makes it easier to visualize how the HACCP plan fits together from beginning to end to control contamination. The flow of people is also important. Employees should not have to pass through possibly contaminated areas to access lockers or restrooms. Washrooms and hand-washing stations should be appropriately placed and equipped with hot and cold running water, soap, and hand sanitizer. Hands-free faucets are required, so it's not necessary to touch a possibly contaminated faucet handle after washing hands. Hand drying should be with single-use disposable towels or hot air dryers. The environment should be engineered to control traffic in ways that maximize sanitary conditions and minimize cross-contamination. Where necessary, workers, equipment, and tools should be restricted to either raw or finished product areas to avoid cross-contamination. But it's very difficult to eliminate all high-traffic areas. For one thing, break rooms, locker rooms, and lunch rooms, by their nature, are there to accommodate high occupancy and traffic. And in addition to the problem of contaminants that travel on our shoes, these areas, which get dirtier faster, can become breeding grounds for bacteria. When maintenance doesn't match the traffic level, these areas also attract pests. Insects and rodents are notorious carriers of pathogenic bacteria. Every food production facility must have a pest control program. That program should be documented and executed by trained and licensed pest control operators. As for the rest of us, if you see an insect or rodent in the facility, report it immediately. Birds may be adorable, but they also carry a bacteria that cause illnesses, as well as mites and fleas that do also. Don't encourage birds to congregate near the plant or near air intakes. And if there is an infestation of birds around the plant, or especially if one gets inside, report the problem to the appropriate person immediately. Having a well-engineered and maintained facility guarded by watchful employees is very important to maintaining the safety of delicious refrigerated foods, and it's part of our food safety initiative as frontline defenders of our nation's food safety. Part of the refrigerated food industry, we can be proud of the delicious array of safe, convenient, palatable food we produce. But some of these foods could be fatal to some people because even though they're not contaminated with foreign objects, they do contain allergens, and some people have violent reactions to them. Millions of people have food allergies. According to a study by the U.S. National Center for Health Statistics, 1 in 4 U.S. children has some sort of food allergy. From 2004 to 2006, an average of more than 9,500 children were released from hospitals in the United States with diagnoses related to food allergies. For that reason, we have programs and government regulations in place to make sure people know what ingredients are in their food. Many people think of allergies only in terms of cold-like symptoms from ragweed or other pollens, or a rash they developed from taking a medicine one time. The symptoms appear when one's immune system reacts to something it recognizes as a foreign substance or threat. When a person's immune system reacts to one of the proteins in food, the result may be mild, like sneezing or a rash, or it may be severe, a serious asthma attack or anaphylactic shock. Either can cause the victim to die of suffocation if airways swell shut. More than 160 foods are known to produce allergic reactions in some people, but over 90% of the allergic reactions are caused by a small group of primary ingredients. In the United States, the 8 major food allergens of concern are peanuts, tree nuts, which includes pecans, walnuts, and others, milk and dairy products, eggs, fish, crustacean shellfish, soybeans, and wheat. In Canada, the Food Inspection Agency also includes sesame seeds and a food additive called sulfite. While sulfites, such as sulfur dioxide, are not allergens, people can have adverse reactions to them, and therefore they must be properly identified and labeled. The European Union also adds other foods, celery and mustard. In the U.S. and Canada, food package labels must clearly indicate if the product contains one of the major allergens. This may be done with a separate statement such as contains peanuts, or the allergen clearly indicated in the list of ingredients. In some cases, the allergen source must be listed in parentheses after the common name of the ingredient. For example, whey, followed by milk in parentheses. Obviously, these ingredient labels and warning labels must be correct. Otherwise, someone could become very ill or die. In addition to labeling allergens that are added, we must guard against cross-contact or cross-contamination that results when an allergenic ingredient accidentally gets into a product that is not supposed to contain it. It can happen if control steps are not followed, and particularly if equipment is not properly cleaned when switching from one product to another. Cross-contamination could occur anywhere the ingredients are received, stored, formulated, processed, or packaged. On the receiving dock, verify that each shipment contains what it is supposed to contain, and inspect each shipment for damaged or open containers or packages. Store and label ingredients according to your facility's allergen policy. For example, some facilities might store them in a separate room or a separate section of the storage area. If they share a storage area with other products, the known allergens should be stored below other ingredients so that if a container is damaged, the allergen can't spill onto or into other ingredients. Containers should be clearly labeled and sealed. If you work in an area where ingredients are mixed, make sure that only the correct ingredients for the recipe are brought into the area. Carefully add only the specified ingredient. If you run out of something, don't make substitutions without the approval of your supervisor. Keep containers covered when not in use, and use only the utensils that are approved for this product and these ingredients. If you generate batches of product that may be added to other batches, your company will have very specific procedures you must follow. All mixed products and batches should be clearly identified, and containers must be labeled. Don't leave anything to guesswork. Keep accurate and detailed records for documentation and batch tracking. The documentation must contain the identity of the product, including any information on ingredients necessary if the facility produces similar products with different ingredients, the quantity of the product, the date and time the batch was made, and where it was stored. If you work in the area where finished product is packaged, make sure all specified packaging materials and labels are present and loaded into the packaging equipment before startup. Having all the required labels is very important, as is making sure the product matches the label that will be on it. If you find labels or packaging with out-of-date ingredient lists, follow your company's rules for disposing of them. Make sure they are not used by you now or in the future. Out-of-date or inaccurate packaging materials have been the cause of costly recalls. Now that you understand the challenges that allergens present, you'll appreciate even more the reasons we must be so thorough in cleaning and sanitizing equipment. We are not only concerned with removing unsightly residues, breeding grounds for bacteria, and the bacteria themselves, we are also making sure that there are not even trace amounts of an allergenic ingredient left to contaminate a subsequent batch of product. We'll finish with 6 key points we all need to remember about allergens. 1. Keep and store foods with allergenic ingredients so that they don't contaminate products that do not contain allergenic ingredients. 2. Be alert for activities that could cause cross-contamination. 3. Use only the designated utensils and equipment when working with the food product. 4. Only mix batches together when it is specifically approved and when you have checked to verify the identity of the batches. 5. Always verify that packaging and labeling information on a product is correct for that product. And remember, this is especially a concern after a production changeover from one product to another. 6. Always follow proper cleaning and sanitation procedures. Remember that we are first-line defenders of our nation's food supply and a force for good in protecting the people. Mentioned a number of times in this Food Safety Initiative series, we're all frontline defenders of our nation's food safety. That includes food defense. Food defense has always been a concern. Over the years, there have been isolated incidents of intentional contamination, usually by someone who was disgruntled, possibly a recently terminated employee or someone with a separate political or philosophical agenda. In a few cases, there were threats by criminals trying to extort money from a food producer. But on September 11, 2001, the term food security took on a new shade of meaning and a new sense of urgency and importance. On that date, for the first time in history, a major terrorist incident took the lives of nearly 3,000 civilians on the ground in the United States. It was a day that changed our thinking and changed the world. The quadruple hijacking of 9/11 made it clear that terrorists could carry out simultaneous coordinated attacks on multiple targets. They could also attempt to, so to speak, hijack one or more sources in our food supply by deliberately contaminating their products. The result would be right in line with terrorist goals: harm some people in order to frighten and intimidate many more people and undermine confidence in public safety and the soundness of our systems. Whether the threat is from a lone mentally deranged malcontent or an organized group of international terrorists, the primary defense perimeter is at the location where the attack is made. In other words, we are the defenders. People who would contaminate our food supply have 4 pathways available: physical, biological, chemical, and radiological. Physical contaminants, things like bits of wood, metal parts, broken glass, metal filings, and objects people would find disgusting, are a type of contamination more likely associated with an individual malcontent. The result could be recalls, lawsuits, and loss of reputation by the company and the industry. The other types of contamination require less volume of contaminant to produce a more disastrous and widespread result, and could be used by individuals or organized terrorists. Biological contamination could include any of the microorganisms we have already discussed, or many other less common ones. If done with a very potent microorganism, it could cause a large number of illnesses and deaths. Chemical contamination can also be very sophisticated or very commonplace. Anything from cleaning chemicals, pesticides, and lubricants found around the facility to more exotic poisons and caustics that would have to be smuggled in from outside. Again, depending on the contaminant, it could be very devastating. Radiological contamination, the addition of radioactive materials, could be extremely catastrophic. Because these materials are hard to come by and pose a threat to the person or persons introducing them, they would be most likely associated with some sort of radical terrorist plot. The attractive thing about food contamination to a terrorist or deranged individual is that it can be difficult or impossible to detect the contaminating substance without special testing. Obviously, if you see foreign objects in the product, or detect an unusual chemical odor, or actually see someone putting something into the food, there is plenty of cause for suspicion. But other contaminants, such as bacteria, drugs, or radioactive substances, may not be obvious at all. So how do we perform our duties as frontline defenders? First, be alert and aware. Virtually everyone has access to something that could be used to contaminate food, and though we associate the crime with terrorists or extortionists, most of the few incidents to date have been executed by disgruntled employees. Second, have and observe good security procedures. For example, access should be closely controlled for any area where food is open or exposed, from the receiving dock to the shipping area. This often applies also to batching areas and areas where batches may be stored until they are used. Surveillance cameras are a good idea in areas where food is processed or stored that may be unoccupied for periods of time. Chemicals such as cleaning compounds, lubricants, degreasers, and solvents should be kept in a separate area of the facility, and access to them should be limited to those who are authorized to use them. They should be clearly labeled and must always be put away in the proper place after use. Policies should exist to prevent people from bringing possible contaminants, such as chemicals, into the facility. In shipping areas, Check driver IDs, keep unauthorized people out, and always seal and/or lock loads that are leaving the dock. The facility should have a personal ID system, and everyone should observe it. This facility uses a biometric device that identifies personnel by their fingerprints. If your job requires an ID badge, make sure it is kept in a secure place and never lend it to anyone. If there are access codes for areas, don't share them with anyone. And when you enter a restricted access area, don't let others without proper credentials enter with you or after you. If you are responsible for entering data into a computer, protect your password and logon ID. They're just as important to plant security as your ID badge. Never share your ID and password to allow someone else to log on. Log on as required and log off when finished. If you leave the computer and you're still logged on, anyone who comes in after you may have an open door to the company's computer system and all the data in it. In addition to observing those protective security policies and procedures, each of us has a role as a food defense agent. This is important because the time to deal with intentional food contamination is before it happens. That requires being alert to people around you and reporting suspicious activity to your supervisor. First, of course, immediately report any suspicious activity in which someone seems to be doing something unusual to or around the food. If you see a stranger in the facility who is not accompanied by a supervisor or other employee, introduce yourself and ask them if you can be of help. Then take them to your supervisor. If you see people spending time in an area they don't normally work in, let your supervisor know. Report any instance of someone taking photographs or video of the exterior or interior of the plant. Also report it if someone asks an unusual number of questions about the facility and how it operates, especially if they ask about things like badges, passwords, security codes, and the like. It's natural for our families, friends, and new people we meet to be interested in what we do for a living and to want to know a little bit about that. But beware of detailed questions from a stranger, especially if they ask you in the parking lot or some public place like a restaurant near where you work that employees go to. Finally, a reminder that what we do on an everyday basis helps protect from any contamination, accidental or intentional. That includes any inspection of the product for physical contamination, objects in the food, start of shift inspections of food contact surfaces and equipment to make sure they're safe and clean, checkpoints at which food or environmental samples are taken for further laboratory testing, and of course, your facility's regular sanitation program, which we will cover in another chapter. Always observe cleaning and sanitation schedules and procedures exactly, and make sure that you don't cut corners by not fully disassembling equipment that is to be completely taken apart, skipping inspections for cracks, pits, and scratches, or not performing final rinses and sanitizer application. If we keep things clean and sanitized, follow all food safety procedures, and are alert to suspicious activity, we minimize the possibility of any kind of contamination incident. But in case an incident of intentional contamination does occur, remember that some of the possible contaminants, such as anthrax or other rare biological contaminants or radioactive materials, can be extremely hazardous to us as well as to consumers. And as 9/11 taught us, terrorists themselves are not concerned about their own fate when they commit these terrible acts. Review and be acquainted with all response and emergency evacuation plans. Know where emergency numbers are posted and whom to call. And do not speak to the media, customers, or the general public about the incident without approval. Leave that to management and the law enforcement and other governmental agencies that become involved. By being alert and responsive and following our company's policies, we can do our jobs as first-line defenders of our food supply well and conscientiously. And it's very important that we do so. Millions of fellow citizens are depending on us. A food safety program doesn't end with creating a HACCP plan, putting all the manuals on the shelves, and training all employees on what's in those manuals. Those are just the first steps. One of the 7 HACCP principles is to establish verification procedures. In other words, a plan only provides protection as long as we know that people are working the plan and the plan itself is working. This means that verification is an ongoing process that must address not only the plan, but product design, the GMPs and SSOPs that are the foundation of HACCP, and the implementation and effectiveness of each critical control point. One of the ways we verify that a plan is complete, effective, and being applied is through audits, both internal and external. And through audits, we can improve and fine-tune our HACCP plan and its implementation. Before we look at the audit and preparing for one, let's consider some terminology that isn't always applied consistently. Various regulatory agencies at all levels of government, from national to local, conduct inspections. Some agencies call them audits, but an inspection is not always a true audit. Inspections cover a specific list of conditions and procedures that are set forth in a law or local ordinance. Inspections focus on compliance and are usually unscheduled. The inspector is watching out for violations of specific laws, standards, or ordinances. The facility may be shut down until the violation is corrected. There are some government inspections that are truly intense audits, like FDA's Seafood HACCP, and USDA FSIS has developed tools for use by Enforcement Investigations and Analysis Officers, EIAO, as they conduct comprehensive food safety assessments, FSA, at inspected establishments. External food safety audits, like financial audits, are usually conducted by a third party, a company that provides the service for a fee. An audit may exhaustively study all aspects of a facility's food safety program or specific parts of that program. Audits focus on effectiveness and thoroughness. An auditor is concerned with compliance with the law, but is also concerned with whether employees are complying with the company's policies and generally accepted GMPs. Audits are designed to result in improvement of a company's food safety programs. National regulatory agencies such as the FDA, Department of Agriculture, and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency perform audits. Such a government audit may occur from 1 to 4 times per year, depending on the nature of a facility's operation and current funding for the government agency. They typically focus, as the CFIA puts it, on whether written procedures are up to date and continue to meet government standards, and whether the HACCP system is being implemented as described and is effective. In that sense, they may be considered partial audits or very thorough focused inspections. Regulatory agencies have the right to perform audits without notice, and often do so if investigating a foodborne illness emergency. However, usually there is notice so that the audit won't disrupt the operation of the facility, and so company personnel will be available to assist the auditors. A concept that is becoming more widely recognized and more important is that of the third-party audit, performed by auditors certified by a recognized industry credentialing body. 2 trends seem likely at this time. Certified third-party audits are likely to become the standard for verification of a facility's food safety system, and as standards and benchmarks for third-party audits develop, the audits performed by both government as well as third parties will become more standardized. A major force behind the acceptance of HACCP and of third-party audits by certified auditors is the Global Food Safety Initiative, GFSI. Launched in 2000, GFSI is a Belgian nonprofit foundation that seeks to coordinate the internationalization of food safety standards and practices. The GFSI guidance document provides the procedure for benchmarking of food safety management schemes, the key elements for the production of food within a conforming food safety management standard, such as HACCP, and guidance on the certification processes of a food safety management system. Now, what if your facility is scheduled for an audit? What can you do to help prepare? The answer for all of us is follow company policies and follow them precisely. Do your job and do it right. Pay attention to all the GMPs and SSOPs and all the aspects of the HACCP plan, from the receiving area through the production line to the shipping dock and in the break room and locker room. The audit is designed in part to measure the effectiveness of your food safety initiative, and it can't be measured if it isn't being observed or if records are not being kept accurately and maintained in a way that they could be found and reviewed. If you are in management or are a supervisor in part of the facility, make sure that all manuals and directives your area is responsible for are in the proper place and are up to date. Monitor the way your personnel are observing the policies and offer some corrective guidance if they're not observing them correctly. If you are in charge of cleaning supplies, the chemical storage area or labeling supplies, make sure the proper tools and materials are available and in good shape, and that chemicals and cleaning products are all properly labeled, stored in the assigned places, and kept secure in line with company policy. If maintenance of measuring and testing equipment is part of your job description, make sure everything is in working order and correctly calibrated and documented. If you're responsible for any part of the record-keeping process, make sure that the records, whether written or online, are up to date, accessible, and easy to locate. If you are a supervisor, member of the management team, or member of the HACCP committee, you may also be assigned to accompany the auditor or auditors during the audit and help them access the information they need to review and the areas they need to see. If the audit is a complete, comprehensive one, the auditors will want to see every aspect of facility operation. They'll need to see each critical control point, observe the measurement process, and may want to take measurements or samples for testing themselves. As with any audit, there will be a major focus on documentation and record keeping, including administration and regulatory compliance, including flowcharts, licenses, basic policy manuals, product list, product specifications, recall plans and procedures, HACCP management, including documentation of prerequisite programs, the HACCP plan, and the membership on the HACCP committee, facilities and equipment plans, maintenance programs and certificates, sanitation, housekeeping, and hygiene plans and records, rodent and pest control plans and reports, receiving and control policies, procedures, and records, process and evaluation policies and records, including CCPs and calibration reports, packaging and labeling policies and records, storage and shipping information, including hold tag policies and mock recall policies, laboratory policies and records, and product defense plans and documentation. The auditor may very well want to see documentation that covers 100 or so aspects of policies, procedures, plans, and records. A list of the typical documents and records that auditors may ask for is included in the instructor's guide and is printable on the CD that accompanies this video disc. Audits and government inspections work together and complement each other to ensure the safety of the food supply. The time spent on an audit not only satisfies the requirement that a HACCP plan must be verifiable and validated, it can help to lower production costs, help avoid costly or even deadly foodborne illness outbreaks, and continually improve the effectiveness of our food safety programs. Remember, although it is wise to do last-minute checks and make sure everything is in order if we know an audit is coming up, an audit isn't about putting on a special show for the auditor. It's about doing our jobs correctly, following food safety policies, and seeing if there are ways we can improve the way we do that. The audits and the trend towards standardization through the Global Food Safety Initiative are working for all of us and all our customers, keeping our food supplies safe. This Food Safety Initiative chapter has to do with an aspect none of us wants to happen: recalls. But in order for a recall to be possible, we must have traceability programs in place to know what foods to recall, from whom, and in many cases, what ingredients were responsible. Concerns over traceability have intensified since the terrorist attacks in the United States on September 11, 2001. Another possible way terrorists could wreak death and destruction would be by causing a large outbreak of foodborne illness. The latest record-keeping requirements for U.S. food producers are in the Bioterrorism Act of 2002. In both the U.S. and Canada, food producers are required to keep traceability records one step forward and one step back in the supply chain. Records must be kept and readily accessible for at least 2 years. Recalls and traceability in the U.S. are the responsibility of the Food and Drug Administration or the U.S. Department of Agriculture. In Canada, the regulatory agency is the Canadian Food Inspection Service. Importers into the U.S. must be registered with the FDA and must be able to make their records available to the FDA within 4 hours of notice. Records must include information about each raw ingredient, packaged ingredient, and packaging material, which must be kept from the time these items enter the facility, including where they came from, through the time they are shipped out as finished packaged product, and control is assumed by another firm or individual. Records may be kept manually, by computer, or in combination, but they must be maintained for no less than 2 years. Each food production facility must have a traceability plan and must be able to demonstrate that the plan works. In case of contamination, it's important to identify and recall the entire lot of affected product while minimizing or eliminating any over-recall. We don't want to unnecessarily recall a large amount of perfectly safe product. So it's extremely important for each of us along the way to make any entries in the records accurately and to make sure the proper ingredients, batch numbers, packaging, and labeling materials are used at each step of the process. Here's a sample tracing system. When ingredients or packaging materials arrive, receiving personnel enter in the record the name, product, lot number, and contact information of the shipper and the date received. The name and contact information of the transportation company that made the delivery, including mode of transport and bill of lading number, and nowadays email address, which is just as important as physical address, and phone number. The identity and product specifications of the shipment are also recorded, including amount delivered, how packaged, brand name or description, and any special identification numbers or lot numbers used by the supplier. In our example, the shipment is assigned an internal lot number, which is also entered in the record. As the ingredients move through the facility, the internal lot number is used to track its progress. Production records also include recipes, amount used, batch numbers, and perhaps other numbers or codes your facility uses in its traceability process. When the finished product is packaged, the packaging materials identification number are also recorded, because one way a food terrorist could contaminate our product is by tampering with or tainting the packaging. The product is carefully labeled with the correct label for this lot. That label contains the lot number or other code the facility uses for identification and traceability of this specific lot of finished product. In some facilities, this may be as simple as the date, or it may include a number of special codes. If the packaged product is then placed in shipping boxes or on pallets, those identification numbers are also put on the boxes or pallets. In the shipping area, personnel complete the process by recording the name and contact information for the company to which it is being shipped. As when received, the shipping date is added to the record, along with the name and contact information for the carrier, mode of transportation, and the bill of lading number. The FDA's online reportable food registry became active on September 8, 2009, and the FDA released compliance guidance documentation, which is available on the FDA website. Reportable incidents must now be posted online within 24 hours through the Reportable Food electronic portal by the responsible party. An incident is reportable, quote, if there is a reasonable probability that it will cause serious adverse health consequences or death to humans or animals. Incidents do not have to be reported if the food is within the exclusive jurisdiction of the USDA FSIS while that food is under this exclusive jurisdiction, or if it is under the jurisdiction of the FDA when the adulteration originated in your facility and was detected prior to any transfer to another party, and all affected product was destroyed or the condition was corrected. Transfer to a company warehouse does not constitute transfer to another person. However, if the product was temporarily in the care of another company, for example, a third-party temporary warehouse, it must be reported. The report itself must contain all the required information. Upon submission of a report, the FDA will assign a unique number, ICSR, which will identify the reported incident in future communications. The FDA may ask for additional relevant information, including how the subsequent recipient of the food was notified, additional results of your investigation, and general assistance in their inquiry and in helping previous and subsequent facilities in the supply chain to eliminate the threat to consumers and remedy the source of the contamination. One of the most costly recalls of food products in the U.S. in recent years was caused by shipments of contaminated peanuts from one facility. Even when our facility is doing everything right, we are not immune to the need for a recall. So having accurate records of what came from whom and when is just as important as recording what we do ourselves. To verify that our traceability plan is working, we must conduct traceability exercises, or mock recalls, twice each year, about every 6 months. That exercise needs to cover every step of the distribution chain, from the receipt of ingredients and packaging materials through the next step in the distribution chain after it leaves our shipping dock. Not everyone is involved in a traceability exercise. The list of those who will should include all departments and personnel who would be involved in a real recall. They should be specified in the traceability plan. A management assessment of each mock recall must be completed after each exercise and documented to produce a balance sheet of the total quantity of suspect product produced and how much was accounted for. It should also indicate the corrective actions taken if there is product unaccounted for, and the corrective measures that would have been taken with accounted for product in a real recall. An effective traceability exercise is one where all identified lots of ingredients or food contact packaging are traced to lots of finished product to the first level of distribution at a 99.5% to 105% level within 4 hours. In other words, the exercise should account for at least 99.5% of the product that might have been tainted, with less than a 5% over-identification of product that had no contact with the fictional contaminant. If the exercise did not meet those standards, we must correct any conditions that contributed to its ineffectiveness and conduct another exercise. Failure to have a recall plan or to conduct the traceability exercises constitutes a major problem in the findings of a HACCP audit. Having a well thought out traceability plan with reliable documentation and its effectiveness verified regularly by mock recalls ensures that in the event of an incident, we can meet our responsibility to the public and minimize the resulting expense for our employer. Observing voluntary and mandatory practices in food safety will help prevent incidents and fulfill our obligation as first-line defenders against bioterrorism and foodborne illnesses.